Hey all, here are OS Reviews. Today we're taking a quick look at a new budget laptop called the BHWW BaseBook. This is a relatively new brand that's competing with the likes of Chewy, T-Class, B-Link, and this model in particular goes on sale during the holiday season for around $280. So very cost effective as a full-sized 15.6-inch laptop that has a Full HD 1080p resolution display, and more impressively it has 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is quite uncommon for a laptop in this price bracket. Previous models that we've seen had 8 gigabytes at most, so you should be able to do more multitasking, open up a couple more programs and tabs in the browser without things slowing down or refreshing on this model. It also comes with 512 gigabytes of SSD, also plentiful for this low price, although the processor is still relatively low end. It's using a Intel Celeron N5095, and this is a quad-core architecture clocked up to 2.9 gigahertz. The computer otherwise comes in two color variants, silver as well as space gray, which is going to be a little bit darker here. The design is also relatively clean with minimal looking bezels. There's also a privacy shutter that you can flick over the front camera or webcam to block the view. And despite the fact that there is technically one fan on the underside of the laptop to prevent overheating, it is extremely quiet. In fact, it can almost pass as a fanless silent machine when it comes to noise. And some final specs here include built-in Bluetooth 5.0 as well as Wi-Fi dual-band AC, powered by a 6,000 mAh capacity battery, which is rated for up to 10 hours of video playback, but under more typical load, it's going to be closer to around 6 hours or so, which is still decent as a 15.6-inch laptop that weighs in here at around 3 pounds. So it's not too heavy either, primarily because the chassis here is constructed out of polycarbonate plastic, similar to something like the LG Gram as compared to aluminum. And some final packaging contents include a charger, which is pretty compact for traveling. However, it is using a barrel plug connection. That being said, this laptop can also charge using the Type-C port. Considering Type-C is a new standard and so much more convenient, I don't quite understand why a lot of these laptop manufacturers still continue to provide a barrel charger when it's just redundant, but it is what it is. There's also an additional mouse that is included as a nice freebie. It is a wireless nano receiver that you can pop onto your computer, taking one AA battery. I kind of like the company's slogan here, which is start from base, balancing performance and value. I/O here includes a micro SD card reader. There's also two full-size USB Type-A ports, one here being USB 3.0 speeds. There's even a Ethernet port for wired internet connectivity, as well as a 3.5mm headphone jack. It has a slightly tapered design, which is a little bit reminiscent of some Acer computers. Creates the illusion that the laptop is a little bit slimmer on the edges, even though that's just the concave nature of the plastic here, but still looks quite good. The other side features the barrel plug as well as the Type-C port. There's a full-size HDMI port for display output, and a second USB 3.0 Type-A port, and a Kensington lock. Located on the very back here is going to be some soft touch rubber feet that prevents the laptop from sliding around. Profile looks like this when you set it onto a table, so it slightly lifts it higher for added ventilation. Last but not least, here is what the kind of hinge part looks like. We have a black color instead. Still is quite clean though, it doesn't really attract too many fingerprints. The hinge though does require two hands to open up, and on the inside here we do have a full-size keyboard, one of the benefits of having a slightly larger laptop, although of course we can't expect the keys to be backlit due to the budget price point. There is however a dedicated numpad section here on the right, along with a power key located on the top right corner. Now there's also a little bit of decorative patterns on the sides of the computer, which is trying to imitate speakers, although this is just for decoration. The actual speakers are located on the back of the laptop here, so it is a stereo set, but the placement is not going to be quite as good as on a front-facing unit, but overall still works fine if you set it onto a flat table. The touchpad area is also quite large and generously sized. Of course, unlike flagship grade laptops, you can't expect this to be quite as silky smooth as a glass finish, but for a polycarbonate texture it actually works quite well. No real issues when it comes to general responsiveness, and again fairly slim bezels on this 15.6-inch panel that at Full HD resolution with IPS technology means that viewing angles at the very least is quite good, regardless of if you're looking at it straight on or if you're tilting it slightly further back. Colors at the very least don't really wash out, unlike cheaper T-in panels of yesteryear. The screen can technically fold 180 degrees or completely flat like on some ThinkPad computers, even though this is not a touch-enabled model, so there is no convertible mode. However, if accidentally, say, someone pushes the screen back, at least it's not going to break quite as easily. And thanks to the SSD, boot up times are relatively quick. It gets into the Windows 11 desktop in under 10 seconds from a cold state. That being said, again, unlike more mid-tier and premium units that we've seen in the past, you won't find any biometrics for unlocking it with a fingerprint or Windows Hello. So on here, you still have to use a conventional PIN to get into the system. Thankfully, this is a relatively clean version of Windows 11, which is fully activated. The Microsoft Store and a handful of utility tools are all you get. So there's not too much extras that are taking up the memory. Everything else you can further download and customize based on programs that you actually need. When we jump into additional file properties, you'll see that, interestingly, the disk is actually split into both a C drive as well as a D drive. This is in contrast with almost all of the other laptops that we've seen in the past. Essentially, there is one smaller drive here that is around 150 gigabytes. It's also where the Windows operating system is installed. So as you can tell, you have around 122 gigabytes free. And then there's also a D drive. You can think of it as a blank M2 SATA drive that they've popped in there, which has a 326 gigabyte capacity. Downside being, there isn't going to be a second slot available anymore. So if you open up the back of the laptop, you can actually pop in your own M2 SSD drive into that D slot, but obviously that would be replacing the 326 gigabytes. So typically we would prefer if that one 512 gigabyte drive is installed in just one of the slots as opposed to taking up two of them and adding it together. Overall, it is what it is, and we can also verify that the 16 gigabytes of RAM along with the processor here are pretty much as advertised under the additional system properties, so those areas all look good. Now when it comes to general system navigation, things like opening up various windows as well as doing a bit of multitasking here all seem to be responding well enough, and there weren't too many problems here when it comes to just jumping around, opening up apps. Do feel respectable in terms of speed. Again, a little bit of a bump compared to really past generation Celeron as well as Atom chips that were at this price range, and we can kind of verify that as well when we look at some of the benchmark scores. Even though these are synthetic and they don't really necessarily always reflect real-world usage, it gives us a rough reference of how things are doing. In this case, the N5095 has a passmark score of a little north of 4,000, and that is compared to some of the more popular Celeron chips of yesteryear and other budget laptops we've reviewed just from a year or two ago, being the Celeron N3350 as well as the Celeron N3450 were extremely popular in the past. And these chips, by contrast, are only reaching about 2,000 or so on passmark. So in comparison, we can tell that there is roughly twice the performance capabilities underneath the hood here, which is why, compared to, again, older budget laptops, things do feel a little bit more snappy and responsive. It is something that is tangible that you can feel as you're navigating around. Now, again, is it going to be as fast as a M1 MacBook or a Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7, i5, i7? Definitely no. But also there's a huge delta in terms of price. And for what it is, I have to say, as a budget computer, I think the overall speed and responsiveness is at least getting to a point where it's not very frustrating to use. Everything in terms of pinch to zoom and moving around at least does feel smooth enough. So as a whole, I would say that speakers are okay. You do get some stereo separation since it is a slightly larger laptop. That being said, it's not the loudest I've ever heard, especially at maximum volume there, but it's passable if you're using it just for YouTube or quick Netflix shows. That said, if you want more immersive audio, you could always use wireless headphones or plug in something using the 3.5mm jack, which again are both present on this model. Again, the display quality, I have to say, is also a little bit better than I was expecting in terms of the viewing angles as well as colors being actually quite rich and vibrant for an IPS LCD panel. So media consumption is surprisingly not bad at all on this budget laptop. In fact, with that larger screen size, it can be quite good for just watching some TV shows. As we are watching back this full HD YouTube clip, you can tell there was really no buffering going on either, so this being a pretty good dual band AC Wi-Fi chip, although it doesn't have Wi-Fi 6 support. The plastic chassis does mean that reception quality is at least quite strong. I never really had to wait too long for the clips to load, almost consistently getting full bars, even if we're a little bit further away from the router at the moment. And in terms of playing it back, it also mostly reflects as we have very minimal drop frames here at the full HD stream, which means as you're enjoying the content, you're not going to notice too much choppiness going on either. Similarly, web browsing doesn't pose too big of a problem for this particular Celeron chip, along with with the 16 gigabytes of RAM means that I was able to open up over 15 tabs and things were still being held open in the memory without too many issues. As I was jumping back and forth between it, it didn't feel too choppy or slow, which would have been the case on, again, budget laptops of yesteryear, especially with only 4 gigabytes. That was the norm just a few years back. So this is a pretty big contrast, and I can still, again, jump back and things are still responsive enough despite these particular pages being pretty heavy with lots of different elements. So similar to on smartphones, a lot of these entry-level budget machines are also getting a lot better progressively. The 15.6-inch display size also makes it pretty comfortable if you're doing a little bit of multitasking, snapping a couple of windows open at the same time, compared to more compact machines of, say, 12 inches or 13 inches, where things might feel a little bit more cramped. It is perfectly feasible to be browsing the web or watching a video while you're taking notes. Doing things like word processing, emails, Excel, and also PowerPoints don't pose too big of a threat, even on entry-level computers like this, and it has a decent travel as well as these island-style chiclet keys. However, it is a little on the hollow side, and also because of the presence of the numpad, do keep in mind that some of the keys are shifted a little bit towards the left. So if you are used to a layout without the numpad, it might take just a few moments for you to get accustomed to this particular layout, but overall it's certainly not bad, and over time, you can definitely still get a comfortable enough experience doing some simple emails and document work. Otherwise, gaming is an area that low-cost laptops may struggle a little bit more in if you are looking at super graphically demanding kind of AAA style titles. That being said, for older games in general, if you're emulating, can still be an okay experience. Lower the graphic settings, as well as consider options like cloud gaming via servers owned by Microsoft or Amazon, and in those cases it can still work perfectly fine. In fact, you get a pretty enjoyable experience with a rather large display on this laptop. And there's plenty of legacy productivity type tools as well as driver support that, of course, an x86 64-bit based version of a Windows computer can handle that many other platforms, including Chromebooks, simply cannot. That is going to be the beauty of having a full version of Windows running on this thing, and application support is generally not an issue that you have to really worry about. Even if you're doing a little bit of light photo editing in Photoshop just without too many layers, it can still be an alright experience if you have a bit of patience. Video editing is not super recommended though, unless you're keeping things really light to just merging a couple of clips together, something like 720 or 1080p, and typically speaking, a 5-minute clip in 1080p will export in around 10 to 12 minutes or so. However, if you're trying to stitch higher resolution clips, longer clips as well, then you would probably want a more powerful GPU than something that is Intel integrated. So that's been a quick look at the BHWW BaseBook, and as a whole, I would say it's not a bad laptop, especially if you're going after a more value-oriented 15.6-inch machine. Just a year or so ago, similarly configured machines with 16 gigabytes of RAM would have often retailed north of $300 to $400. So it's great to see the cost of computing continue to get lower and become more accessible to more folks, while now delivering performance that's just a little bit more stable if you're just doing some casual everyday tasks, that is. As long as you don't expect miracles if you are a true competitive gamer, that is, I think it still will satisfy a lot of the, again, basic computing needs for this relatively affordable price range. So you can check out more details if interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That has been the BHWW BaseBook.